Yeah, hello? Hey, Frank, how's it going? Yeah, I'm just at the office, doing some work. So what's up? Why'd you call me? Oh, my Tarmac SL7 that I just recently bought. How's it doing? Yeah, it's just at home. I've been riding it a lot. And by a lot, I mean at the cafe shop. Anyways, you're saying that there's a recall on the Tarmac. Hey, that's pretty tricky because I have a charity ride coming up, a Grand Fondo, big event. So how long are you going to need my bike for? 2 weeks? Well, the only reason why I bought it in the first place was to flex on everyone. So as long as I have it for the Grand Fondo and I can flex on everyone else at the office, then that's all that matters. So yeah, I'll drop it by later today. And yeah, I don't even care why there was a recall because at the end of the day, I'm only riding it at the Grand Fondo for the year. Okay, Frank. Thanks. Ciao. Hey pillars, and welcome back to another video. I hope you guys enjoyed the parody at the beginning of this video, just poking some fun at Specialized and SL7s. And with that being said, we're going to be talking about the controversy surrounding the SL7 recall that Specialized has recently issued, and just my opinions, and explain the whole situation from top to bottom, from beginning to end, and just sharing everything that, if you missed out or don't understand the situation entirely, that's what I'm here to actually bring light to. And the reason why I want to do this video, and I named this video Tarmac SL7 Recall, the worst of the cycling industry, is because in my opinion, and that's another disclaimer that I'm going to have to put out there, is that this is my opinion in terms of everything that I share. So don't take anything as 100% fact, but in terms of what I think this recall really shows is just in 2020, 2021, this should have never happened. This should never even be taking place in the first place. So the fact that this is happening, we do have to talk about it because we need to demand more from the cycling industry and not just, give them our wallets and expect them when there is errors like this to just bend over and be fine with it. So with that being said, another disclaimer I want to say before we get into this video, there is obviously engineering talks throughout this video. I am no way an engineer, so a lot of the topics I cover, I'm not going to be covering it to an engineer level, but I do have a good baseline understanding, a generic customer, and obviously working in the cycling industry, knowledge of how these things work. So I'll try my best to explain some of the terms, and yeah, we're going to get into it. It's going to be a good video because I don't like how this isn't being covered 100% properly, because a lot of the big publishers in the cycling industry that get these bikes firsthand to review from Specialized, oh wait, they're not covering this recall and making videos on it. How crazy is that? So that really triggers me. And like I said, there has to be more accountability in the cycling industry, especially with these margins. We all know Specialized is infamous through their marketing and how much they retail stuff at. So we're gonna get into it right now. Now I have all the points I want to cover in chronological order so we don't waste time and overlap anything. But the first thing we have to know is what bikes in specific are being recalled. And those are bikes that were sold between July 2020 and September 2021. So that's a lot of bikes. Now the first thing Specialized did, in my opinion, that was terrible is how they actually did the rollout of this recall. So there wasn't a stop ride immediately, meaning that when Specialized at the highest level knew that there was an issue with these SL7s from this time period that didn't have, and we will touch upon what they didn't have that led to this recall, that they didn't issue immediately a stop ride. They waited until they figured out a solution, prepped the whole procedure, the whole chain of how they would actually deal with this, and then issue a stop ride. And then it was perfect timing for you to take your bike in and get it serviced. So in their mind, they were trying to minimize the PR backlash that they would obviously endure. When we get into these prices of these bikes, they're ridiculous. So the fact that an engineering mistake and negligence took place that obviously led to this recall, the fact that they didn't issue a stop ride immediately, because whether or not someone got injured or bikes were we have pictures of them, bikes were pretty much destroyed as a result of not having this thing in place in terms of the solution, that they should have issued it right away. Because the fact that you could be riding a bike that Specialized at the highest level knows that they're going to have to recall, they don't issue it, you could be unlucky and actually have a fork failure. So it's lucky, to my understanding, no one has had a catastrophic fork failure, but it's negligence in my opinion if you know that there is an issue that you don't issue a stop ride immediately. And the fact that people are fine with this is very disgusting. I don't understand how logically you could be like, yeah, HQ, headquarters at Specialized, knew that there was an issue in terms of potentially having a recall, and they don't issue a recall because they don't want bad publicity and bad PR. So they'll just keep letting their loyal customers that have spent not 2,000, not 3,000, plus 5K. And we'll look at the prices right now. Like I said, if you go on the Specialized website, I'm on the US website right now, I don't see anything about a recall. And I do understand, I've worked in the cycling industry basically since I was 17, 18 for multiple years. I understand for certain recalls, they actually get the dealers to contact the customers respectively. Obviously, it's a cleaner and obviously a better PR situation if you do it from that regard. But the fact that they don't have it here, it rubs me the wrong way, because this is something that, you know, you're spending $15,000, $14,000, $13,000. Like, this is something that you think when you buy a Specialized bike, that you're buying, you know, the piece de resistance in terms of cream of the crop in cycling. And the fact that you're having things from an engineering standpoint that could have been avoided is just, in my opinion, doesn't even make logical sense. So the way that you actually find out about this recall, and like I said, this isn't only, you know, Specialized that does this. A lot of companies do it like this. You have to go right here, safety notifications, and then it will come up and you can actually see the recall for the SL7 as the first thing. So this is notices right now, and we'll go into that shortly. Now, the last thing that really upsets me when it comes to this Specialized recall and their proposed solution is that it doesn't guarantee a fork failure not happening in the future. And what I mean by that is because, in my opinion, Specialized had negligence in terms of how they engineered and delivered said product to customer that now can be compromised. So this solution can maybe stop any future failures potentially from happening, but the fact that it could be still compromised and another type of failure could happen is just, in my opinion, should have never taken place, especially when you consider, like I said, if I've already said it, the price of these bikes. Let me remind you that, like in most of the cycling industry, prices went up during, I'm not going to say it, but obviously you know what time. So the fact that Specialized is one of the highest in terms of retail bikes, the fact that you have to pay a premium and now you're out of a bike until it gets fixed. I know it's a fast and a pretty quick fix, but the fact that you have all these problems and the potential in the future of not having, you know, a piece, which is your fork, a pretty important part of the bike. And the fact that your fork, one of the most important parts of your bike in terms of integrity, can be compromised, and you've already spent pretty much a fortune. Well, that's all related to how much you make, but you know what I'm saying? Like, it's a pretty high ticket thing to spend your money on and have a headache like this that could have been easily avoided through the engineering process. And obviously the fact that that has slipped under the radar and we're in the predicament that we are in is just ludicrous. So this is the part of the video where I will be explaining what causes the fork to fail and also what triggered this recall. And I will be doing it in a way which is easily understandable. Like I said, I am no way an engineer, but I do have a background in science. So I'll try my best to explain the terms that are necessary to understand this in a little bit more in depth than just this is the problem, it gets cracked or something, and then we have to repair it. Like, I'm going to go in depth, so if you do like it, it's going to be pretty interesting because I thought this was interesting to learn as well. So this is the SL7, and you can see that the fork steerer, which is the top part that connects to the handlebars and stem, it has cracked into two pieces. So this is usually a pretty catastrophic fork failure. If this was to happen downhill, you know, that's pretty rough. And I laugh because it's just crazy to think that this can still happen in 2021. Obviously, there's freak things that can happen if you don't check your fork. I will touch up on solutions when we get to that point, but I'm just saying, in this situation, the fact that this is caused, in my opinion, through negligence and through designing is just inexcusable for a company as big as Specialized and that charges as much as Specialized does. Now, this graph is directly pulled from the Specialized website. A is the bikes that were being sold previously that have this recall issue, and B is what all the new bikes have, and also what the recall will actually put onto your bike and change over from the A parts. So the fact that Specialized has been slowly doing this, potentially for the past 8 months, in my opinion, is just disgusting, because yet again, they should have done a stop ride, had the bad PR, but at least fix the situation instead of like smoothing it over and saying like, oh, if you were one of the ones that had the first initial batches of the SL7, yeah, there's a recall and you could have had a catastrophic fork failure. So basically, Specialized has been using a compression ring that has very jaded edges. So the reason why that's a bad thing is because if you don't have a chamfer, and that's what it's called, so I didn't know that that's the proper term, but something that smooths this, that the steerer won't actually have any stress concentration on it. And that can lead to cracking and obviously a fork failure. So as most things that I'm learning for the first time, I looked up the word chamfer, and it is to ease otherwise sharp edges, both for the safety and to prevent damage to the edges. So the fact that $10,000 bikes and $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 bikes don't have such a simple chamfer, and the compression ring can actually damage the fork steerer, is ludicrous. That is absolutely ludicrous. And I've read on some blogs that, this is very basic engineering. Like, I have some friends in engineering. This is something that you should have been able to, spot on right away. So the fact that this got overlooked is ludicrous. So other than the fact that the compression plugs will have a chamfer that will smooth out these edges, and the reason why the edges are like this is because of the integration for the brake cables. And I will get into how I just think that's ludicrous as well in terms of the whole integration, how everyone is very hot for it right now. But they also have made a longer expander plug just in case, and that's what I'm going to get into, just in case there still is a potential fork failure. They cover their bets in terms of, having something that can actually keep the integrity a lot better than having a short one, depending on where this stress fracture could happen, the stress concentration. So you might be asking yourself, he's talking a lot about compression rings. What is that? So I'll be explaining it, and I'll give it an overview. If you want more in depth, do your own research as I did, because if you don't have all the visuals and really think through it, it can be difficult if you don't come from a science background or from an engineering background. But basically what this compression ring does is that it slides over the fork and sits inside the inner race of the upper bearing. The reason why you need this is when you tighten the headset, it applies pressure from the bearing moving and keeps the steer tube in place. So the reason why you need a compression ring is that it is required to take out the slope between the steerer and the bearing. So it can be confusing. Like I said, watch a lot of videos on different systems, because when you compare threaded to these systems, it makes a lot more sense visually of why you need certain things in one and not the other. And going back to the compression ring, you might be asking, how is this piece able to create stress concentration that can lead to a fork failure and a fork to crack? So basically the compression ring is typically made out of steel, sometimes aluminum, and it is obviously a lot harder than carbon. So if this is rubbing against the fork, or you hit something like a pothole, or you're on a bumpy road such as cobbles, if this is rubbing against it, it can keep, those micro movements can actually create structural damage, especially in carbon fiber steerer in terms of the fork. So, the fact that this wasn't thought of from the inception, from the first models, blows my mind. And I know we can all say hindsight's 2020, but when you're dropping $10,000 on a bike, these issues should not be present at all under any circumstance. Let me make that extremely clear. So this is another picture that I was able to find on a blog that basically showed that there was no chamfer around the compression ring. So that's very scary. Very scary if you're riding that, because over time, like I said, if you're hitting bumps, if you're a heavier rider, that's a lot of pressure on the front end of your bike. So we will be looking at the Specialized website and what that is insane. That is insane. That's on the fork. So, the biggest thing you always have to do, and I will touch upon that when we look at the solution. So this is one of the diagrams early on with the SL7s, I guess the initial batch with the PDF for shops to actually understand how to set the bikes up, because obviously it's a lot confusing and very much difficult when you're setting up integrated handlebars, because any mechanic that's going to lie to you and be like, I love doing integrated handlebars. It's just the best thing to do. I love bleeding brakes with no, that's total lie, because I've worked in several shops and no one enjoys integrated, brake bleeds and stuff like that. So anyways, the reason why I'm showing you this diagram is because you see the compression ring, but you don't see the chamfer, because that is super important. And another thing I want to know in terms of integrated, I've already talked about why I really hate integrated handlebars and systems as of right now, is because there's just so much that has to be done in terms of testing. I don't want to be, and I don't want any of you viewers and peddlers being test subjects for these systems. And looking back at the compression ring, if this can cause a fork to fail under obviously certain situations, not every situation, the fact that brake cables are going through this just gives me very sketchy vibes. Like, I just wouldn't feel safe. And that's how a lot of these integrated systems are as of right now. It's because you're trying to make it all tight, all come into one section of the bike to make it look clean and aesthetic, but yet you're putting your life on the line, because if your brake fails going down the descent, I really can't, that's one of the things that I don't mind, having my brake cables exposed. Yes, it doesn't look as clean or Instagram aesthetic, but I like knowing peace of mind that, hey, you know what? my brakes are not going to fail. Obviously, I'm running rim brakes, but having the fluid stuff like that just gives me very bad liability in terms of feeling confident. Like I would feel every time I ride, like on my brake cables, like you would have to check that routinely, and I will get into that. It's just more of a hassle for what the true benefits are. Like if you're riding a lot, I think at the core of it, yes, everyone likes to have a clean, nice looking bike, but if you want a bike that you can trust when you're going down a descent at 70 kilometers an hour, you don't want a bike that looks super pretty. You want a bike that works and that you're confident and you're not checking every day that if it's in perfect condition to ride and doesn't have any failure. So the fact that they don't have the chamfer in this diagram, it's telling. It's telling because look at all the detail they've gone to, but yet they forgot something that obviously as an engineer, and like I said, these bikes are not cheap. They're not 3K bikes, 4K bikes. These are $10,000, $15,000 bikes. Obviously they don't cost that much to make, but in terms of retail and what people are buying them for, that's insane. This is in the recall, one of the PDF guides for shops. So it's very simple. They're going to take out the old system, which is the A system here, and they'll put on the B system. So it's basically doing the exact same thing. Now, one thing I want to touch upon is the solution now. So we'll get into the Specialized website because I'm going to roast this to the T. Like I said, I've done videos like this in the past where we've talked about expensive road bikes are a waste of money. We've done expensive road bikes are worthless. And what I mean by that is I haven't even talked on these videos about recalls. I was just talking about the fact that you can do a lot more with your fitness than in terms of the bike itself. And the fact that you're having issues like this, yet again, my bike hasn't been recalled, luckily. Obviously, you never know with certain bikes, but usually if you're buying a bike that's generic, it's proven, it has proven design, rim brakes, not integrated, not new of the new, you're not gonna have issues. And we'll touch upon the excuses because I know a lot of people are gonna be like, but you need to make steps and there will be mistakes that you have to correct if you want to push the boundaries of what bikes can be and what bikes can perform as. I get that. We will talk about the excuses, but I want to touch upon Specialized's solution. So we're going to be taking a look at the Specialized website. Safety notices 2021 Tarmac SL7 recall. Dear Specialized rider, we are issuing a voluntary recall to replace expander plugs and upgrade compression rings on Tarmac SL7 bikes and frame sets and have not received any injury reports. So this doesn't mean that there hasn't been an injury. It just hasn't been reported. It just hasn't been reported. So that's very telling as well because they're saying that there was no injury reports. Is that why it took them potentially 7 months? Then again, that's speculation. I'm not saying, but I'm just saying 7 months, potentially 8 months of them knowing, not doing a stop ride just because they haven't received any injury reports. Specialized and retailers will contact riders that are affected by this recall via email. So obviously, very good for PR. You don't plaster it anywhere. And obviously, no big cycling publishers will be talking about this. I wonder why. Because Specialized gives them bikes every time they come out with new ones to test them. Interesting. And I'm not salty. I just find it very funny that, it's always nice when things are brand new, but when actually things happen and people's hard-earned money is potentially put into jeopardy in terms of you bought something and you can put your life in danger, big publishers won't talk about it, And if you don't get that email for whatever reason, obviously, Specialized is relying on the shops to do the due diligence. But what happens if that doesn't happen? Who's responsible? It gets very technical, but it says, please read the instructions below to determine if your bike is affected. If so, reach out to your authorized Specialized retailer. Like, how would you know this? How would you know that to reach out to your authorized Specialized dealer? Who will replace the current expander plug figure 1 with a new extended expander plug and upgrade the compression ring to the newer style 2-piece compression ring if your bike is not already equipped with one. Wait a minute. So the original ones in A were not equipped with it, but potentially your SL7 could. So Specialized already corrected the issue and didn't do a stop ride. Wow. In my opinion, that's ludicrous to me. In my opinion, I think that's just very negligent. And I wouldn't want to ride a bike that a company knows about an issue, covers it up, and then talks about it. That does not sit with me right whatsoever. And if you hear anyone on the internet, on YouTube, not taking that responsibility, obviously they're in bed with Specialized somehow. Either they're a publisher, they're a dealer, they're a rider. If you're not going to take responsibility for that, obviously you're in bed with Specialized. So I find it very cringe when people are going to be like, it's not that big of a deal. What do you mean? They're fixing the situation. No, the problem is they already fixed it without telling other customers that had what figure 8 is, because some customers already had figure B because Specialized corrected it. That's disgusting. It is a privilege to share our passion for bikes. with you, and we're committed to getting you back on the road as quickly as possible. That's disgusting. That's disgusting. Anyways, reason for the recall: harsh frontal impacts, impacting a deep pothole with significant force, or honestly just being a heavy rider and riding rough terrain like cobbles. Where I am in Europe, there's cobbles. May put extraordinary stress on the headset components and may initiate a crack in the fork steer tube. A damaged fork may break if continued to be used. So it says all Tarmac SL7s are affected by this recall. If your bike is on the list, then you're not affected by this recall. Tarmac SL7 models have a word Tarmac written on the back of the bicycle's seat tube and can be distinguished from older generation Tarmac models by the integrated hidden cable. So they're saying if yours is integrated, and yet again, they're pushing for integration, you can see how more problems happen. So they're saying these ones are affected, these ones are not. So it says if your bicycle was not originally equipped with an integrated cable routing headset design on the picture above, then you're not affected. And these ones, SL6s or the lower models, are not as well. Wow. Furthermore, it goes on to say, please stop riding your bicycle and contact. So now you're out of a bike, but it'll be replacement parts to no cost to you. What will Specialized do for affected riders? Specialized rider care and retailers will be contacting riders who are affected by this recall. If your bike is affected, then the install and the replacement parts are no cost to you. Obviously not. But the fact that now you lose riding and now you're sketched out is just disgusting. So we will be talking about the solution because I think the solution is not looking too good in my opinion. So after reading Specialized's recall, that is the solution that they're going with. They're having a longer expander plug part and also an upgraded compression ring with a new chamfer. They're calling it a two-piece compression ring. But this is just right off the bat, more weight. And I know I'm not going to get into it because I said weight is not everything. But yet again, may I remind you, if you are spending, $15,000, 20, 30, 40 grams of this expander plug, I'm not saying it's life or death. But yet again, if I'm paying $10K, I want my bike to be as light as possible. Obviously, I wouldn't be riding a disc brake bike, team rim brakes for life. But I would be very triggered from this. Very triggered because yet again, this could have been avoided from design. But they are covering. Specialized, in my opinion, is covering their butts by having a longer expander plug just in case there is a fork failure, which kind of sketches me out. And now the other thing is that you're going to bring your bike in because I've done recalls, I've done warranty issues at bike shops. Now you're going to bring your bike in. And the thing that always sketched me out, and I wrote this down, I don't care if it's the best mechanic. Like I said, I've been working in the cycling industry when I was 17. I've seen it all. I've seen everything pretty much. Well, there's always new things to see, but I've pretty much seen the gist of it, right? And the thing that always sketched me out is that for recalls, you have a mechanic that is great at building bikes, repairing bikes, knows their way thoroughly throughout the bike. But they are not, in my opinion, an engineer. They're not a structural engineer. They're not going to, look at the carbon fiber and be like, yes, there's a stress fracture. It's at 5%. You're lucky that you caught it early because if you didn't, you could, no, they're going to take their fingernail or whatever. I have this thing and they're going to scratch it, feel it. I've done it in the past. And it's just one of those things that always sat wrong with me because it's like, if I feel it and I don't feel anything, but truly there is something structurally wrong. Obviously, if you have something like this, yeah, you can tell right away, like that fork looks pretty compromised to me. I wouldn't trust that fork. And that's one thing I'm going to get into is that it is your responsibility as a rider to always drop your fork out every month, check it, make sure that there's no nicks and potential, stress fractures or cracks in it, and make sure that you're safe riding because at the end of the day, unless you're going to take your bike to the bike shop every day and get checked before a ride or every month, you should be, taking that responsibility and looking out for safety things because that's just going to make sure that you feel more confident. You're going to be able to ride better, safer, faster, and just feel good. But yet again, that is just something that's crazy. The fact that you get to bring your bike in. They're like, no, you're good. You don't need a fork replacement? You're good. Let me put this new compression ring with this circular two-piece thing that we call a chamfer that we learned today, and I'll just put a new expander plug that's very long, right? And you're thinking, you know what? I guess if my fork isn't compromised, it should be good. And then 2, 3, 4 months later, 6 months later, you hit a big pothole. Your thing was already slightly fractured. You couldn't tell by the finger test or even from the visual test, and you crash and you have a fork failure because you already rode 20, 30,000 kilometers from July 2020 all the way to September 2021. And yet again, I'd say 20,000 is kind of excessive. Obviously, most people are riding in a year 10,000 kilometers. But yet again, Specialized doesn't know what riders are doing what. So if you're a rider that were riding a lot, maybe you're a heavy rider, you know, the fact that from July 2020 to September 2021, you could be causing stress fractures or like small cracks that can lead to a fork failure, that when, you know, a retailer checks it, he's like, nah, you're okay, or she or he or whatever checks it, and they're like, no, you're okay. And then they put the new system in, but you could still have a failure. That is why they're putting the longer expander plug, which sketches me out, because I would demand as a customer, I want a new fork. I don't feel safe. But yet again, I've worked in the cycling industry, and I'm at the point on my YouTube, you know, in general in life, I don't really care to keep anything secret. Most bike shops are very, very bad with warranty, because obviously from a business perspective, if everyone came in and said they want a new fork, Specialized would be like, dang it, like we're losing a lot of money. Even though the markups are so high, Specialized would not want that as a solution. So obviously they're going to try to minimize and mitigate loss by saying, no, you're good, you don't need a fork. Retailers, tell your customers they don't need forks, right? Which is, like, if I spent $10,000 and I feel like I'm not safe, like that's disgusting. So that's what usually happens with a lot of bike shops. And I can speak personally, Hank, because I've worked in these bike shops, and I have friends that work in these bike shops. A lot of the time, the owners don't want to piss off the region manager in terms of telling them that they need 4 new forks, even though there's no visual structural damage. It's just one of those things that they want to minimize their loss, which obviously as a rider, as a paying customer, you should not feel okay with, especially the fact that Specialized is trying to potentially cover their butts if there is a fork failure by having a longer expander plug. And on top of that, they already changed new models of the SL7s with the solution and didn't do a stop ride right away. So the excuses I'm going to hear right now, I wrote them down because this happens all the time. It's like, even when I had my rims failing, I bought new rims, but I had rims failing that were stock rims, and people were like, well, that's what you get when you buy that level of bike. And yet again, I've ridden very expensive bikes and very cheap bikes. No, that is not something you expect after 3 months of riding. So the excuses need to stop. If you're dropping $10,000, there should be no excuses. And I truly do mean that, because that is your life. And anyone that Specialized says that there hasn't been any reported, you don't know. You don't know if someone bought a Specialized bike, an SL7, and went to a country like a foreign country that's not popular, that doesn't know he was riding a Specialized bike that had the recall, and maybe he tragically passed away. You do not know. Specialized does not know, and I do not know either. So the fact that, in my opinion, like I said, this whole video, just to cover it, these are all my own opinions and speculations. The fact that there could have been failures, Specialized knew about this and slowly changed it with newer models and issued it later, is disgusting in my opinion. So the excuses is this. I understand, and we understand as a cycling industry, is that for progress to happen in terms of integration, cleaner bikes, yes, there will be mistakes that happen. I totally understand that, but not at the expense of customers. Meaning that, you know, in terms of this, I'd be truly issuing new forks. Be it again, it's a whole cost risk ratio. If only 3 people potentially in the future have a catastrophic issue, it's easier to pay that out through settlement potentially than having to issue, all new forks, which is crazy. The world, that's how business works. So that's how I always feel. I don't want to be a test subject. I'd rather ride something that's true in terms of being tested. Let other people, unfortunately, even though I've done videos talking about the warning signs and stuff, I don't want to be a test subject. So, for all the people doing integration, I don't want to be on the receiving end of, brake failures, because yet again, when people try to compare pros and whatnot, like, yes, if you're getting your bike checked, the cable's bled every month, every 2 months, the also stuff happening, not very common, but for the normal rider, is like, you don't know, especially a lot. Like, how many of you have dropped your fork out after 1 month of riding? Not a lot. I could tell you probably like 90% of you have not done that, which is scary. So, like I said, I don't believe you should have to put your life in jeopardy for the advancement of cycling technology. And I don't want to hear how in other industries there are recalls, because this is purely poor engineering 101 and a strawman fallacy. I'm not debating that in other industries that there are recalls that are inexcusable as well. And obviously it's a case-by-case situation. And obviously I'm not saying necessarily, yes, for the advancement of stuff, this should have never happened. This should have been caught. This is not something that is totally unforeseeable. No, this makes logical sense. If you have, jaded things coming in contact with the steerer, as an engineer, you should be able to catch that before it even gets manufactured. But regardless, the fact that they did sneakily is what really triggers me and what should trigger specialized riders and people that were thinking of buying a specialized bike. And my last thing in terms of the weight, like I said, I'm not that caught up on the fact that this is going to be heavier than this steer plug, but it's just the whole idea. You're spending $10,000, $15,000. Why do you have to put more weight on your bike now? If you obviously have the money, you want as light as possible. Then again, you should go for a rim brake bike because spending $15,000 on a like 6.8 kilogram bike is ludicrous as well. But it's just that whole idea, like you spend that money to have a lighter bike and now you're putting more weight back onto it to fix a problem that shouldn't have been a problem from the beginning because of poor engineering. So just look at the predicament that you are in. Now to end off the video, I do want to leave it off on a positive note. And I just want to say that in terms of holding these cycling companies responsible, there has to be voices like my own and like others on different platforms that actually take and get specialized to claim responsibility. Because the fact that it's so hush-hush is just obviously to cover their bottom end, and it's just very disgusting. Like I said, you have cycling publishers that will always cover new bikes and cover it, but will not issue something that could save lives. And that's the whole thing funny I find in the cycling industry. I'm not going to get into it, the agendas that they try to push, but it's just that whole idea of that one of the strongest things that we should always be pushing is rider safety. And in this situation, a lot of publishers, a lot of cyclists that are sponsored, a lot of other, potential channels and publishers that are sponsored or given or are in bed with Specialized in one way or another, they're not going to go out and out and say, no, Specialized, it's good that you're going to try to fix the situation, because obviously if you have like a ring of death in terms of like cracks on your steer, like that has to be replaced. So it's not like Specialized won't replace it. It's just a sketchiness of if it's not like this and it's like very small and you just get waved off with the fix, with the Band-Aid, and you actually have a fork failure, like that's your life on the line. So it's just funny how no one's holding Specialized responsible and saying, nah, the fact that you tried sneakily fixing the situation on newer models that got released throughout that time and not addressing the original ones right away when you knew about it, whether or not people got injured or not, is not acceptable. Because if we're gonna hold the cycling industry to standards on certain topics, then we need to hold it on for everything. But it always comes down to a money thing. So this was a long rant, and I just hope you really appreciate me going to the depth. And I'm not a hater. At the end of the day, I love bling bikes. I love value bikes. At the end of the day, you spend what you want to spend your money on. But yet again, the thing I've always laughed about, because I've owned these bikes, I've worked on these bikes, I've ridden these bikes, I've raced on these bikes. The thing that always makes me laugh is that you're thinking that you're getting the best of the best and you're running into problems like this. So I'd rather have something that is a true system. I've made other videos talking about it. I probably will do some new ones, but I like waking up and not having to deal with stuff like this. Because all I can say, and I'll touch up on this, and this is a really good last point. I'm in the country of Georgia. That is pretty much above Turkey, below Russia. And there is no Specialized dealer. And if I owned a SL7 that I bought, hypothetically in this hypothetical situation, if I bought it in July of 2020 and I need to get it replaced, is Specialized covering my flight to get to the closest retailer? How am I going to do this? They just told me to stop and ride. So I might have to wait 2-3 months until it's convenient for either, if hypothetically in the situation, work, family commitments, whatever commitment that's going to allow me to fly to a Specialized retailer. Then again, I could have these parts sent to me, because I don't want to see any troll saying you can just get the parts sent to me. Who knows, because they usually get sent to the retailer only. So you'd have to figure that out. But then if my fork is compromised like this is, what do I do? What do I do? I have to get that replaced. So do you see the problems that you run into, and like who's held responsible for that? So the fact that this has even happened blows my mind. I'm going to leave it at that because this video is way too long. I'm way too triggered. I probably got to go for a ride or something and de-stress. So like the video, subscribe to the channel, and until the next one, keep on pedaling.